Hey again, it's Christina from Sunshine and Flora. So in this video, I want to share with you my seed starting calendar for the year. We are in the beginning of February, and pretty soon I'm going to be getting really busy with my seed starting. And I know sometimes it's kind of hard to plan out when exactly you should start your seeds for planting in the garden, for planting in the hoop house. So I want to talk about that a little bit at the beginning of this video. And then I'm just going to go through my garden journal from last year and tell you when I started all of my seeds. Now I am in zone 5A in Northwest Iowa. So depending on your average last frost date, that is the key to knowing when you should start your seeds. You may have to taper this a little bit. Now, if you're curious how to find your average last frost date, it's super easy. Go to Google, type in average last frost date by zip code, and then put your zip code in and it pops right up on the screen. Mine says May 1st through 10th, which is totally believable. That is usually what I plan on, the second week of May every year. Now, I also apologize if my voice sounds a little scratchy. I've got something going on. Either I caught something from my daughter or working in the hoop house this past weekend stirred up my allergies. But anyway, let's just jump right in. One more quick thing before we jump into the seed starting schedule. I wanted to share with you guys that I've got a brand new website up and going. Check it out. I now have an online store where you can order garden supplies, garden tools, garden-related paper goods, lots of really fun things. So if you're needing a gift for someone, feel free to check it out. All right, let's get into the journal. So each year I write in my journal when I start all of my seeds, when I plant everything out in the garden. Before I had the retail shop and was actually tracking orders that way for my cut flowers, when I go to farmers markets, I would write down what sales I had at every market. I would kind of draw some diagrams in here. It's just really fun to look back year to year what I planted. I make notes of what I really liked, what definitely didn't work, just a lot of really good, useful information. So I've already started a tab for 2025, and basically the only things that I've done is start some Lisianthus, I've started some columbine seeds, and then of course my hydroponic tulips. But I'm gonna go start to finish with you guys through 2024 and tell you when I started everything and then about when everything got planted out in the garden. Now, when you're starting your seeds, you do need to look at the seed packets. For example, if you're ordering seeds from Johnny's, on the back of the seed packet, it will give you all of the growing information, which includes how many dates before planting out you need to start your seeds, whether it's 6 or 8 or 12. So I look at my average last frost date, let's just call it May 10th. If I need to start my seeds 6 to 8 weeks before that date, I count back from May 10th, 6 to 8 weeks, and that's when I start my seeds. So that's why it's so important to know your average last frost date. So if yours is not similar to mine, you need to taper your schedule based on your date. Okay, enough rambling. So it looks like last year I started my Lisianthus seed on January 2nd, and that's about the same time that I started it. This year, Lisianthus is very slow growing. It's always the first flowers of the year that I start from seed. They can be planted out a little bit earlier because they're cool flowers, but they definitely are very slow growing. It says on January 10th, I started some dahlia tubers in soil. Now, this was very early to plant out in the garden, obviously, but I was doing this so I could take cuttings from my dahlias. So what I did was I just took those 4-inch nursery cups, plopped the tuber in, put some soil around it, put it under grow lights, and then once the cuttings got a few sets of leaves, I would razor it off, and I have a whole video on this, so look that up. Then I would put that in rooting plugs, and I would create a whole nother dahlia plant. I'll probably do that again this year because it works so well, but if you're looking for a good winter project and a way to increase your dahlia tuber stock, that is a great way. Okay, so then we get past Valentine's Day, and I was selling those hydroponic tulips again. I like to kind of write my market goals and my sales goals in here. The next thing I did was on January 25th, and I did the winter sowing, which I have already done that for the year. Winter sowing is always a really good winter project to kind of get you in the mood. Then we're at February. So the first seeds of the February season, which I need to actually do this like next week, the first seeds that I started last year were my snapdragons for the hoop house. And last year on February 9th, I started 400 snapdragons, and these were the Potomac and the Maryland varieties. Now, we will probably get to it in this schedule, but I plant my snapdragons at anything else in my hoop house much earlier than it goes outside. So you kind of have to figure out when you're going to plant things in your hoop house and then count back the weeks from that instead of your average less frost date, if that makes sense. On February 9th, boy, I had a busy day. I also started pre-sprouting my ranunculus and anemones, and those also are for the hoop house. Then it was Valentine's Day. Mid-February, I started some columbine. I have already started those for the year because I didn't start them early enough last year. Those are perennials, so I want to get some good growth on those and pot them up. So actually, I've already started those. Then we get to mid-February. So it looks like the week of the 20th is when I started a lot of my cool flowers. And here is a rundown of all the types that I started. I did straw flower, yarrow, stock, and then it looks like another round of Potomac snapdragons. These are all for outside, I'm guessing. Then February 21st, I continued starting more snapdragons, more stock, and then the Fama pincushion flowers. And yes, these are all for outside. So it looks like my hoop house snapdragons, I start a few weeks before anything that I plant outside. And then February 22nd, I started some rudbeckia, and then it looks like my petunias. Now, petunias are a warm season flower, and I start those for my window boxes out front of the business. I start those so early because I like to pot them up into the 4-inch nursery containers, and then when it's warm, move them out to the greenhouse. And by the time I plant those out in the garden, they look just like I've gone and bought them at a garden center. It's really fun. Okay, I'm going to keep talking fast because I can tell my voice is getting a little scratchy. Okay, so March is another big seed starting month. So 1st of March, looks like I started my mahogany splendor hibiscus, craspedia, more of the Fama pincushion flowers. Not because I wanted succession. I think I just ended up getting more seeds because I knew I wanted more, so I started those later. Status, more snapdragons that were for succession planting, dianthus and ageratum. Now, the reason that I do succession planting with some of my plants is that not all varieties will constantly produce. Sometimes there's a little bit of a lull, or sometimes plants get tired at the end of the season. So I like to start some successions. Sunflowers you have to plant in successions if you're growing the pro cuts, otherwise they're just one and done. But with snapdragons, I like to do a couple different successions because there's always a lull, and then I try to get some blooms. Zinnias also get a little tired at the end of the season, so I like to have 2 different plantings of zinnias. Okay, looks like on March 4th, I planted my 500 sprouting ranunculus out in my hoop house. So my average less frost date is May 10th. I was planting in my hoop house 2 months before that. Now ranunculus are really, really hardy. They can take that cold. I did not plant my snaps in the hoop house that early. However, this year, I already have snaps growing in the hoop house, so maybe I can plant them out that early. It's all going to be an experiment. Currently in my hoop house from the fall, and I'll throw a few pictures up on the screen from this last weekend, I have dianthus, snapdragons, and campanula. These were fall planted. They will bloom early in the spring, and they're just looking amazing. Now, I do have them covered with frost cloth. Last year, my campanula were up to my shoulders. They were so awesome. So I decided to experiment with the dianthus and the snaps too. But March 4th, ranunculus in the hoop house. Now on March 11th, it looks like I didn't get them all done in one day, and I must have not gotten to it right away, but I planted a few more ranunculus, and then I put the anemones in the hoop house also. March 12th, I started saponaria, Chinese forget-me-not, feverfew, and some Amazon dianthus. And then March 21st, it looks like I started more Rudbeckia. I restarted my Craspedia. I had an issue. I think they all dried out, and so I had to redo them. It wasn't too late, though, because I had some good Craspedia out of the garden. I started Gomphrena, Honeywort, and it looks like my Fama Blue Pincushion flowers that I started on March 1st, March 21st, I potted them up. I think I did them in soil blocks and then I potted them up into a regular 72 cell plug tray. Sometimes you need to do that because if the soil blocks, some things can last in the soil blocks the whole time. Other things I like to pot up because then it just makes the plants even bigger. Okay, then it was Easter. April 5th, I planted my potatoes. Good Friday is kind of the time when we here in the Midwest all plant our potatoes in the ground. However, Easter was so early last year, I kind of waited. So April 5th was when I planted my potatoes. I'm going to be doing a lot more vegetable gardening this year, and I think I'm going to be sharing some of that on this channel. So watch for that. I'm going to be growing some things in my hoop house to sell at the market. So be on the lookout for some hoop house grown vegetables. So also on April 5th, I started some clary sage, chamomile, cosmos, amaranth, and then all of my celosia. This year I'm going heavy on the celosia. It is just such a workhorse in the garden, does so well in the heat, isn't bothered by bugs. There's so many different shapes. I'm going heavy on that this year for fresh and for dried. I do want to mention cosmos. I started some cosmos ahead of time just to plant out to be a little ahead of schedule. Most of my cosmos I direct seed, like after the last frost, so third week, very end of May. We're on to April. So it looks like on April 18th is when I started harvesting my daffodils out of the garden. That is usually the first thing that I have to sell besides my hydroponic tulips. I was potting up some more seedlings, and this is when I kind of start tracking orders. June is the first farmer's market. Okay, then the next page, I took one whole entire page. You probably can't even see this. And this is when I planted everything out in the garden. Oh, hopefully I just didn't bump my microphone there. So the first thing I planted out in the garden last year was on May 9th. And that is when my hoop house snapdragons went in and my hoop house stock. And if I remember right, that was too late. And I think I just got really busy and I really wanted to get them planted in April. Last year, we also had kind of a crazy spring. It was really, really cold. I remember my tulips were a little later coming up. I remember being really nervous about planting some things out because of the cold. So hopefully this year in April, I can get those things in the hoop house. May 15th is when I planted the Status out. Status is a cool flower and can take the cooler temperatures. I probably could have planted the Status a little earlier as well. Oh, my voice. I just did a little squeak there. The next day on the 16th, I planted Rudbeckia and snapdragons outside. The 17th, more snapdragons, strawflower, more Rudbeckia. And on May 20th, can you tell that the very end of May is like my heavy planting season? May 20th was Status, Feverfew. I transplanted some Veronica, Strawflower, Honeywort, Saponaria, Clary Sage, Fama, and Euphorbia. Now on May 21st, I planted all of my pumpkins. I direct seed my pumpkins. I grow these for a specific market the end of September. They were ready, perfect timing. Pumpkins you can't plant very early. You definitely have to make sure that you are past your average last frost date. Otherwise, you're going to have to start all over. Direct seeding also works the best for me for planting pumpkins. I don't like to start them ahead of time. Sometimes they don't transplant very well. That also goes for melons. So direct seeding just really works the best. They start really quick. Also on February 24th, it looks like I planted my first zinnias out. So these were a bunch of the Flora varieties. And then I also planted Honeywort, Saponaria, and Dara. And those were direct sown. I also direct sowed some cosmos. This is still on May 24th. And then I planted all of my mini pumpkins. Now on May 28th, I direct sowed the rest of my zinnias. These were out in another patch, and these were all of my Bennery Giant zinnias. And then my dahlia cuttings that I had used from my pre-sprouted dahlias, May 28th is when I put these in the garden. Looks like I also planted out a few Lisianthus and some Mahogany Splendor hibiscus. This year I'm getting Lisianthus as plugs. They will be going in the hoop house probably in April. And then on May 30th, it looks like I direct sowed more cosmos. I planted amaranth, celosia, and then May 30th, I also direct sowed my first round of sunflowers. Looks like I started with a small batch of just 100. Sunflowers I typically direct sow in the ground every 2 weeks, and as I get closer to July, I kind of increase how many I plant a week. When I plant for that big market that I do in September, I typically will do 2 different weeks of about anywhere from 300 to 500 sunflowers those 2 weeks. May 30th, it looks like I also planted out my ageratum, craspedia, direct sowed a few more zinnias. I planted out some ami. And then June 7th, this is actually kind of late, but I'm sure it was just because I was getting around to it, planting the last of my celosia. I direct sowed another round of sunflowers, this time over 200. And then I had a few of my zinnias, either they dried out and didn't germinate, or some of my floret seeds didn't have the best germination. So on June 12th, I had to replant a whole bunch of those. Then it looks like on June 18th, I worked in the hoop house. And the one good thing about having the hoop house is I can start flowers earlier in there for an early crop, like ranunculus. Once those ranunculus start dying off in the heat, I clean all those out and I can plant a whole second crop of things so I can use those beds twice. So it looks like on June 18th, when I ripped out all those ranunculus, I planted, this is all direct sown. I did bachelor buttons, Orlea, cress, Dara, Ami, and Saponaria. I also direct sowed a little bit later than that, I think it was end of June, some sunflowers and zinnias. And I got harvests off of those too. So if you really plan out your scheduling of your hoop house and do things accordingly, you can get a second harvest. Pro-cut sunflowers usually can harvest in 60 days. So as long as you plant 60 days before your first frost in the fall, you're gonna get blooms. So I can plant sunflowers all the way through mid-July. I think that does it for all of my planting, because then it just goes into all of my markets, all of my profits. And then we come to December 17th when I started my first hydroponic tulips for Valentine's Day. Full circle. So anyway, I probably went through that a little bit fast. Feel free to pause and write things down. But again, make sure if you're writing this down to taper it to your average last frost date. I hope this helped some of you with your planting and planning for the year. And now that we're in February, next week I'm going to be starting seeds already, probably with snapdragons for the hoop house. So make sure to watch for that video next week. I'm really excited to get some things going. I hope you guys are having a great February. Again, check out my website and my online store, and we will see you soon.